Data Storytellers. Today, I'm here with Pascal Tyrell, who is the Director of Data Science and Associate Professor over at the University of Toronto. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Paul. Great to be here.
Cool. So obviously we met at the conference in Toronto, had a really great time, and I was keen to kind of take a deep dive into some of the stuff you were talking about. Before we get into that, just tell us a few words about yourself, your background, your journey to this role over at UofT.
Sure, happy to. It's not a direct path, so I'll keep it brief. But essentially, I started off as a researcher, so I did graduate work in, actually it was bacterial or microbial physiology. But I did that, and then I switched from that into the computer industry. I went into computer software and programming, and then did a little time in the finance industry, and then now's the data science part. I started a work at the Hospital for Sick Children and as a data manager, and then decided to go back and do some more graduate work. And that's when I did my degree in clinical epidemiology and biostatistics. And here I am now. So now that's the culmination of all that ended up being data science, which interestingly at the time when I was doing all this, it wasn't really a thing. And then it became a thing that, if you bring all that together, so content and computers and programming and math and statistics, you end up being a data scientist. So there you go. That's the story.
The Pascal story. I like it. So what are you working on currently in your current role with UofT?
So at UofT, I'm the director of data science in my department. The department is medical imaging, hence my backdrop, for brain MRIs. My area of research is in artificial intelligence in medicine, obviously as applied to medical imaging. So that's probably the biggest focus I have now. I also do biostatistics as well, statistics in that area. So the data that I work with mostly is going to be images and then the associated features that come with the images. But that's essentially my day job.
So you kind of sit at this interesting intersection of data and education and hospital medical life sciences, if you will. What are the kind of trends that you see that kind of cross span these industries, if you will?
So trends relating to how we manage data or
exactly
how we work with data? Yeah. So I actually I also run my own company, Softex Innovations, that develops software in the industry. So I can also tell you a little bit on the, the cross section with industry as well, because that's an interest of mine, innovation in industry. It's all very similar in the sense that I think it's a new era of discovery. I know that sounds really silly, but really what it is the tools that have been introduced are just catching up now. And so the one I'm going to refer to is like the cell phone, for instance. Smartphones just give us the ability to see so much more data, leverage more data, and more importantly, I think, is understand more data. And so I think that's what is happening is this ability to access so much data and information is empowering so many more people in the population to ask for more and expect more, which in the past we didn't. And so now what we're doing is we're scrambling and trying to catch up in terms of how do we, from an academic standpoint, how do we teach, how do we educate people to understand the usefulness of data and how to apply it. And then on the flip side, in terms of using the consumers of data and information, we need to understand how is it going to help us. So how is that going to move us forward in what we're doing? So that would be industry, and as you say, in the healthcare industry as well. How do we benefit from all this wonderful data that's now being collected and manipulated? How do we put it to good use? So I would say that's when you ask for a trend, I'm going to say that that's probably what it is that we're all kind of scrambling to meet this new, as I said, awakening or discovery of data. And I think that's a challenge. So.
Absolutely. So with the fields that you work in, which are obviously quite broad, and you kind of
Mhm.
have your fingers in many pies, so to speak. So what do you, how do you see data analytics today? So what do you think about the state of data functions in, say, education and healthcare, and with the other companies you work with?
Mhm. Mhm.
What do you think about the general progress of this data-driven business transformation?
So I think a lot has been a lot of change has occurred in the area of data analytics, and a lot of it has been, as I just said, the advent of lots of data to push this forward, right? Whereas before it was data was, I'm not going to say scarce, but almost, right? That it
Mm,
just wasn't really available and it wasn't trusted, right? And so data analytics was smaller, right? But now that we have so much data and people are realizing that we can leverage this, that there's so much more focus on it. So the way I would describe data analytics right now is a little bit like it's almost like I'm not gonna say a secret, but everybody's working on it, right? Everyone's trying to build out their analytics team and build out their pipelines and how are they going to do it. And I think there's still a little time left before we start to see big or large gains on people who have put in the infrastructure and, more
mm,
importantly, have put in the education to start benefiting from it. So I think we're in that kind of lull that we're going to start to see huge advances thanks to data. And I think
mm,
that's how I would describe analytics, is that you have some shops that are just, wow, they've just dove right in and they've got everything, you name it, they're using it. And then you have other companies that are still kind of, well, I don't really know,
mm,
and maybe I should. And so it's just kind of a mix at this point. But inevitably it's going to happen for everyone. It just really, you need it.
mm,
like there's no doubt about it. This idea of going on best practice, going on what I used to do, what I've seen before, those days are gone. Like those days are truly gone. Now it really needs to be um, something that is clear and shown and transparent is what the
mm.
expectation is now. I think of data for sure.
And to start with that, you need to kind of define that, right? So you mentioned that the
Mhm.
different organizations, companies, they will be at different stages of the journey.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
how
Mhm.
do you define like what is data drivenness, let's say? So how do you as an organization or an individual in an organization measure that?
Wow. The way I would summarize that, I think, is maturity. Is that a good way of saying it? Like I think it's where you are at, right? So it is a level of maturity of how you understand data so that you can leverage it. So I mean, a lot of words that are thrown around, of course, is prediction, right?
Hmm.
So how can I leverage data in order to predict an outcome? Well, that's great, but really what you're interested in is prescription, right? So meaning that if you can predict it, how can you get it to do that regularly? So if it's sales and stuff, I mean, it's great to predict sales, but what you really want to do is you want prescription, which is, applying that knowledge of how it predicts so that you can repeat it over and over and over, and then you're successful, right? So that I think is a
Mm,
level of maturity. So in the sense that if your organization truly understands there's basically 5 concepts in data science that are all interlinked that need to be leveraged together in order to benefit. And I mean, if just not to start lecturing, but essentially you have your inference, which is your prediction, which is great, everybody knows that. But more importantly, and this is all the data, people out there are going to be thinking, well, okay, there's distribution of my data that I need to
mm,
appreciate. There's expectation, which is the expectation of what distribution you're going to have. And then variation, which everybody knows, which is, if we didn't have variation in data, then you wouldn't have data, right? I mean,
mm,
there'd only be one. And then the last one, which everybody forgets, is randomness, right? Which is just uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know if I repeat it over and over and over and over, I can expect a distribution of that data. So anyway, I'll stop there. But just to say, those companies that can really leverage all 5 of those are going to do extremely well. And what happens is you have companies that are not quite there yet, And they're going to be focused on just one or two of those concepts. Very often they're going to be inference, right? So the ability to predict, how do I predict this, right? But they're not going to think about, all the other components, which if you do appreciate them or master them, what happens is you do truly have the ability for prescription, right? So meaning that I know now how to repeat this so that I'm successful in what I'm doing in business. And you can only do that if you can appreciate all five. And to do that, you need maturity. You need to have teams that have that ability. Not everybody is a master at all five of them. So you have to have a team that's talking together to make that happen.
Yeah, this is all super interesting stuff, because what we're alluding to now is building data and analytics teams, which is a huge challenge for everyone. You mentioned that organizations are kind of they're good at the inference kind of stuff. When companies start to mature, where do you think they see the biggest barriers?
Wow, that's a good question. So meaning like as they're maturing, what are the biggest barriers they're going to hit, right? Yeah, that's a great question. So,
and this is all great for me because I'm getting like a free lecture here. This is like $10,000 a year, so I'm all good.
I'll try not to lecture too much, but the stages are inevitably is when you're learning is you learn all the concepts and then you try and apply them, right? So I think where companies when they hit that. The first problem they're going to hit is they're going to have this knowledge, right? So they're going to hire people, let's say, or they're going to train within to understand these concepts and start putting them to work. The tricky bit is actually observing, the change that is expected. So meaning that, you're going to put all this money and time into building these teams and all that, and you're going to have measures of outcome, or hopefully you measure your success, your performance. And then the piece that hits is that it all takes time. And here's the other one. And I'm going to go back to another, one of the five, which is randomness, right? So randomness is, uncertainty of an outcome, right? So that's random, right? But what you have to understand too is randomness is part of life, right? You need that. And depending on the variation in your data and your randomness, you get different answers. So everyone appreciates that, right? But what people don't quite appreciate is that over the law of large numbers, right? So for those, in marketing and finance, they understand that is that if you repeat it over and over and over and over and over, you're going to observe a distribution of your answers, right? Based on what what you're doing, right? But here's the tricky bit. What if you don't observe the distribution that you were hoping? That's a huge disconnect, and that's expectation, because you're going to have an expectation that if you roll a fair dice, six-sided dice, if you roll it once, you know that you have a 1 in 6 chance of one of the 6 numbers. But if you roll it over and over and over and over and over, the expectation is you're going to have an equal distribution of 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s and 6s. Cool. What if you don't get that observation? What if you don't get that expectation of equal distribution of 1 to 6s? Well, you have a dice that's not fair. It's loaded, right? And so as a company, if that's what you're doing, is that you're measuring over time all of the data that's coming in, that's what you're going to be looking for, is that if what you've expected is not what you've expected, you have to modify your model to make better predictions, better prescriptions. And that's what you need to look for. And so there's the barrier, is that everybody's looking for a quick fix, right? Everybody says, okay, we're doing this. I'm spending this much money as a company to make this happen. I want to see results in 3 months. It doesn't matter how hard you work on it. If you're not collecting enough data, you won't be able to learn from it in that time. And I think that's probably the biggest tricky bit, is that we're all time crunched. We all want to be successful. We all want to leverage this data as quickly as possible, but we do need to be patient. Sadly, it just comes with time, right? And another great example, and I've lived this one, sadly, is if you're a manufacturer and you're manufacturing a device, let's say, right? It doesn't matter how much you test it at the beginning, right? Your engineers are going to tell you it works great, and the error rate is like tiny, right? And you're like, oh, wow, okay, tiny error rate, fantastic, right? But what people, some people anyway, don't realize is that, with success will come your challenges. And so if you are extremely successful and you push this device out to hundreds of thousands of people, well, that small error rate starts to become a problem because it is impacting your sales, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a great example of how long does it take you in market to discover that you've got a problem, and what could you have done beforehand, before pushing it out the door, that would have saved you that problem, right? And that's a classic example of problems in manufacturing, which, if you're a startup and you don't have the money and all that kind of stuff to do the amount of testing you need to do, you're going to push it out the door anyway. But so what I'm going to say is that's where data is really helpful, because you can keep assessing the data as it comes through the door and seeing, am I on track? Am I getting what I expected? Or am I getting a distribution that I'm not expecting? That's a red flag. We need to check that out. So that's, there's another example of where it could be helpful.
Yeah, this is all super fantastic stuff. I love the idea of using the dice as an analogy, because this is what executives do. They roll the dice with data analytics, expect to get X amount of ones, twos, threes, but that doesn't account for that randomness. So you need to be able to position data analytics in the organization to sell the long term as a data leader, which is really great too. And you also alluded to the problem of data there, which is, an example that comes to my head is like for a company like HBO, they might want to see how many people watched the last season of Game of Thrones. But they might want that information more than anything in the world, but they're not going to get it until it's broadcast, right? You need to have that patience, and this is one of the qualities, not just of organizations that understand data, but also the individuals who are spearheading both the data function, data management, data analytics, and AI as well. Because another idea of like rolling the dice with data analytics is, I don't want to wait, so I'm going to throw AI, or I'm going to throw ChatGPT, or I'm going to throw technology at the problem, and that means I don't need to be patient. But as you rightly alluded to there, there's all these factors that are running at play that will just go against you and then create a longer problem. And this is what executives and the junior data leaders need to understand. Like, people coming into the field need to know the landscape that they're dealing with, rather than just coming in and being like, I want to work on a project. I don't need to feel like it has value for the business. I just want to work in data. I want to earn 150, 200K and work in data. That's not really how the reality of the business landscape works, as you probably know already.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. So just tying on to the qualities of the data leaders, then when whether you're teaching students on this stuff or whether you're working with the individuals in the organization, the change makers, what do you think are the qualities of those leaders who can get these projects over the line, can instill that patience into leaders and who are actually successful at driving these transformations?
Yeah, another always a great question for sure, right? Because there's always so many different styles of getting the same job done. But the way I would like to describe it, and that's because I live it, I'm in this position, is that you're essentially in the middle, right? So let me explain that. So another way of visualizing that would be like you're the honey. And so who wants the data are the bears, and who's making the data or who's producing the data and working it are the bees, right? You have your worker bees. So, but as a leader, as a data leader, you're the honey. So meaning that you need to attract the bear, right? So you need to work well with, your executive, who are asking the questions and asking of you answers from the data. But you also have to be a product of your team, right? Which is what your honey is. You're a product of your team. If you're not a product of your team, you're in trouble. you're all by yourself, right? So and so you have to play that middle ground very well as a leader. So you have to be with your team and part of them, and they have to understand what you would like from them, and you're managing them and working with them. But then you also have to appease the bear, right? And so the only, in that analogy, the only part I'm not really great about is that this concept that the bear is the big bad, bear that's coming after your honey. It shouldn't be, it should be a very, close knit group where the people that are requesting the data should also be involved. And I think that's the job of that's the honey bit, the attraction, is that you do need to attract the execs. You do need to attract those people that are consuming your information from your data to participate as well, because it truly is a team effort. And I'm sure you've heard this a zillion times, right? It's a team effort. But I'll tell you, it's easier for me to work with, the bees, and getting them to understand, why, what's the value of their job and what's the value of what they're doing, and cleaning the data is terrible. 80% of the work is cleaning the data, and it's, oh God, what a chore. But the thing is, it's so important, and they get it. They understand that it's their job. And then to throw in a little bit of why it's important, that what are the questions we're answering, they gobbled it up, right? They love it. They're like, oh my God, that's great. This is why I'm working toward, a day in and day out on this data. It's to answer these questions. Great. So they get, that's easy. The other side is not. So bringing execs to the table and getting them to understand, how important their direction is, how important their understanding of the data is, and rolling up their sleeves and jumping in is very difficult to do. And it's probably, I would say, more of a barrier than on the other side, for sure. Because if you don't have the direction, and not only the direction, but if they just say, if they come to you and say, okay, based on the data, how do we improve sales? I'd like that for in 2 weeks, please, as a report for the next meeting. And you're like, okay, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with that, but I'm going to find something. And that happens all the time, right? As opposed to someone coming in and sitting with the team and saying, these are what the markers are, that this is what's going to change us, right? This is I need to make a decision as an executive, and let me tell you what I need in order to make this decision, and what I would really like to, what I would appreciate to hear from you from a data standpoint. And that's not easy. That is when it really works, and you do make change. And that piece is just really hard. So to answer your question, what are you looking for? You're looking for that person who can actually serve both sides and encourage and engage both sides, so that it all works in the end to get what you need, right? That's what I would say.
Yeah, and again, just a ton of interesting stuff here. And I spend my life speaking with leading practitioners in data and analytics, and usually like the more strategic guys. So you're actually kind of uniquely positioned to answer this question. It might feel like I'm putting you on the spot here, but it's only because you have this unique academic perspective. Is that, for example, when an exec comes and says, I want to improve sales, and they're like, well, what do I even do with that? When, from your, and maybe not necessarily the guys that you teach, but with the up and coming data scientists, let's say, and the data leaders who are going to be going into these big companies, what do you think is the academic pitfall in general that is stopping these guys from being those worker bees, let's say?
That's a classic, for sure, and it's a challenge right across the board in academia, for sure. And so I think it's application. So in the sense that, once again, you have a continuum from, the data, I'm sure you've heard, data, information, knowledge and wisdom, right? So it runs all the way through that, everyone knows that. And so the further you are away from one end or the other, the more challenging it is, right? So in academia, we're pretty far away from the wisdom and knowledge, right? So meaning that, what do we do with the data, and how do we apply it is not, I mean, it's taught, but not really, right? And so that's changing. Just to be positive, that is definitely changing, right? But a lot of what is looked at immediately is, how do you clean the data? How do you do the stats? How do you do the engineering in order to process or, edit the data and analyze the data, and what software to use, and how do you learn how to use software? All that's covered, no problem. The challenge, of course, is that the application of what you're going to do is so diverse. There are so many different companies. Each company has so many of their own different problems, and the data looks different. That that's a challenge for academia in order to instill in the students, this is why you're doing it, and this is how doing it this way is going to help these kind of companies, or this. So it tends to be a little bit generic, right? In the sense that we answer the most obvious questions. And then what we do is we train the students as best we can to be as adaptable as possible, so that when they come in the company, oh, wow, look at that. It's totally different. But you know what? I'm ready. I'm good to go. So universities are good at doing that. But I would still, I definitely still prefer to have more hands-on, examples and data sets as much as possible. And even like co-op's great, right? So, living it in a co-op situation is so helpful, right?
We're seeing that a lot here in BC, actually, with the whole even that's, it sounds silly, but getting a data scientist to work on the metrics for a coffee shop, and even learning to take those reports, to learn that you're not a report taker, right? That's not the job but that's the job you're going to be doing, at least initially, until you can, work your way out the business or work your way into the organization and figure out the intricacies of how it operates. That's really the big gap. And that's something that I think academia can't do, is they can't teach how the operating models of the thousands of companies that are out there, right? It's just not practical and feasible. What they can do is they can set the preconditions, which is kind of what we talk about here at the Data Storytellers, is set the preconditions for that person or individual or team to be an asset for the organization, which in turn creates that cultural transformation in these legacy companies. Our clients aren't the Apples, they're not the Googles of the world. They're, for example, as you mentioned, legacy manufacturers, life sciences, inpatient, outpatient hospitals, all these kind of really interesting companies as well, and a bunch that we saw at the conference as well. So just turning the spotlight back to you as well, because I've given you a bit of a hard time, but I want to give you a chance to talk about how some of these skills played into your career success. How did they help you, for example, build relationships as a leader? How did they help with transformations, all these kind of stuff?
So as I said, my career path was a little unique. So I'm not encouraging people to have that path, but would I do it again the same way? Yes, I would. And so interestingly, for me, the skills were a tool, right? So it was a means to get where I wanted to go. And I picked them up along the way. So I've got to say, from my perspective, and I know it's a little unfair, but when you have, the three pillars of data science, right, which is your math and statistics is the one pillar. The other pillar is computer science and engineering. But the third one is content expertise, right? So for business, for instance, it's going to be the people that, need the information to run the business and be successful, right? If you don't understand your data, you're in trouble, right? You really need to understand your data. So I've got to say, for me, becoming, as you say, moving your way up, through the continuum, and leading in the end, content for me was the biggest. So taking an interest, it did not matter what industry I was in. So I've been in many industries, but taking a genuine interest in the content. So meaning, why do we need this data? How is this data going to impact the business? How can we use the data in such a way that we're confident? I think that's a big one as well that's often missed, is that you always have this desire to have answers, right, for your questions, but then you don't ask the confidence in your answer, and that's a huge problem. And that is something that, as a statistician, for me, it's obvious, right? But for people that are not, that's a problem because they won't ask, right? So, and very often, the ignorance is bliss, or, as an executive, you're going to say, okay, I need these answers. You get the answers. And then, the data scientist is going to say, oh, but wait a minute. I got to give you a little bit, of a, there's a grain of salt here that, you have to be careful here. The confidence on this is whatever. It's low because of whatever, our data is this or whatever. As I said, the expected distribution, we're not really seeing that. So that might be a problem. But so if you don't listen to that's huge. That's a big problem. And I've got to say, for me, like, to answer your question once again, definitely that's what helped me, was understanding the content, right? And then realizing, or providing comfort. I know that sounds really silly, but I think that's, from a leader standpoint, I think that's what is expected of you, is to provide some I say comfort, it's
Mm.
actually confidence, right? But if you are able to provide that to whoever you're working with, they like that. They really appreciate that. And I've been ignored so many times. I can tell you right now, I've been ignored more times than I'd want to admit, where I say, well, wait a minute, I'm giving you this result, but I'm a little concerned about the data here, and we should wait a little bit on this. Oh, no, we're all good. We're all good. And how many times have they, they don't come back to me, of course, but it fails
Because your data
miserably.
was wrong.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's exactly. Yeah, it's your fault. Your data was wrong. But just to, I mean, it's funny, but it's not, right?
Yeah.
If you were able, or the times that you are able to share that concern, and then they say, oh, okay, good, thank you, we'll take that under advisement. We'll change the way we're gonna roll this out. We're gonna roll it out, but we're gonna check on this and check on that and slow down, whatever.
Yeah.
That wins. That's a win right there. That's a win. And so I think that's important as a leader in the area of data science, is that it's not just giving the goods. You have to be prepared to give the bad news that comes along with it, and back it up, right? And so I think that's the tricky bit, but that makes you a good leader. I think people appreciate that, right?
And it is tricky, more so for like, if you look at like the functions of an organization, manufacturing, supply chain, R&D, data, data is really the purveyor of the truth, right? That's why there has almost been a gap, and that's exactly what we talk about here. Our kind of like three key words here at the Data Storytellers are influence and persuasion and communication, because there is this misconception that the truth will carry you through. And in an evangelist society, that would be great. The truth does carry you through. In the business world, in the real world that we live in, you need to use as you said, you mentioned courage, you mentioned coming forward there. And I think that having this courage, having this empathy, understanding the needs, and being able to leverage that is a severely underrated skill. And even if you look at the academic journey of the data scientist, probably you're well more versed in this than I am, but you mentioned like maths and stats, computer science. When I think of someone studying maths, I think of someone, or computer science, I think of like hunched over, like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, typing away at the computer. It's a very introverted study in general. Obviously, we're making generalisms here. It's not like a drama degree, but you need to be able to, the best data leaders out there will be the guys who take those leaps of faith and they leverage those softer skills along with their technical expertise, because that's aligning the truth, and then you're kind of being this actor in the play. And when you have those two forces, it's unstoppable. This is what we see all the time. The best data leaders are the ones who have harnessed both those skills.
Yeah, I agree, and I like the name of, when you say data storytellers, you're absolutely right, and I think that's the key to success if you want to be a leader, is that you have to go beyond the data, you have to go beyond your analytics, and you do need to tell a story, and it's so important. And I'm not the first one to say this, obviously, but the ability to be able to do that, I think, is what's going to contribute to you being a leader for sure. Yeah.
Well, Pascal, I've had a genuine lot of fun. It's been a very different perspective than one I'm used to. Speaking with someone who's heavily invested in healthcare and academia, so I have very, very interesting stuff here. You started on something. You mentioned you have this unconventional career path. So, what made you fall in love with like the data side of things? What do you like most about your job?
Once again, a great question that I get asked often, and I think bottom line is I like the position of being the honey. I really do, in the sense that I'm a little geeky. I enjoy computers and programming and getting into the data. I love data. I love stats, all that stuff. But why I particularly love my position is because I like taking that role of, exactly as you say, having the courage to connect with the users, right? The application. I really enjoy that part of seeing that I can work with this data, and by doing so, I'm going to impact, in my case, people's lives, right? And I really like that. I mean, for business, it's the same thing. I mean, you're impacting your company, you're increasing sales or whatever. That's fantastic, right?
Or if you're in American healthcare, you're doing all of those things.
You're doing
And you're
all those
helping
things.
people.
Exactly. Yeah, even better, right? But I think that's what I like is that ability to really see that my efforts impact the users. And that's the biggest, that's why I enjoy the position the most, because if I was just a data analyst, I wouldn't have that ability to connect as much as I'd like, for instance, and the end user. But that's what I personally enjoy is that ability to connect the dots, like right to the end, right? So not just cleaning the data or running the program or writing the script and go, yay, I wrote the script, I'm done, but the more difficult piece, which is to actually see change, right? Make change.
And I always like to ask this question. I'm going to phrase it a little differently for you. How do you, because you said you have this unconventional role and you're kind of doing wearing a bunch of different hats, which I think is always a great attitude to have to professional life. How do you see your hat in general? So what I mean by that is, I might ask, do you see yourself as a data champion or a data evangelist? What kind of hat are you like a data teacher? Are you trying to teach, grow the world with data? How do you characterize your own role?
I would probably say I'm more of an educator for sure. I like that aspect of it. And inevitably I'm biased in the sense that I do think that, the more you understand the process as a company, as an individual, doesn't matter, the better off or more successful you're going to be. So I would say if you had to, if I had to, you're asking and what would I see? I would probably say education is the biggest piece, because I've done, it doesn't even matter, even if it's an industry, it's the same thing. I end up doing exactly that, which is kind of funny, is I'll sit the executive down and say, hey, I'm going to talk half an hour here and I'm going to explain to you why you need to connect to your analytics team. Right. And I love doing that, because, once again, it's satisfying, because you see the impact that it has. And for me, it's just a visible gap. How about that? Like, I just see that as a gap. It's missing very often, not always, but very often it's missing. And so I'm just like, great, I'll just fill that gap. You know what I mean? Like for me, that's just perfect, right? That's what I do. And that's what I enjoy doing. So that's what I look for.
So what advice would you give or what advice do you give to your students when they're leaving and they're going into these big companies? What's if you could only say one thing, what would that be?
Get involved, be engaged. So they kind of mean the same thing, but it means don't go into your new role as a data analyst. Let's say you've just graduated and you're going to go in as a data analyst and just put your head down and program. Don't do it. Get engaged as much as you can. If there's any opportunity to talk, to go up the ladder, right, in terms of use of your data, right, just the more opportunity you have to get involved and learn, the better. So meaning that you've been trained to be an analyst. Fantastic. Are you going to learn new tools? Of course you are. Are you going to do corporate training? Of course you are. How do I plug into the new environment and all that stuff? You're going to be very busy, but take the extra time to try and connect with people that are asking of you this information. And I know how hard that is, because you just don't have that access. So, I mean, my company is very small, but, I talk to everybody in my company and I'm happy to talk to them and explain to them, take the time to explain to them why I'm asking them for this information. And you're going to say, oh, that's so altruistic of you. No, actually not at all. Because if I do that, what's going to happen is they are going to think of things that are going to help me. And that happens all the time, that the more time you spend explaining to people, why you need it, how you need it, and how you're going to use it, and let them run with it. You got a lot of smart people working for you. They're going to come back to you with interesting ideas or interesting ways of doing things, or, as I said, confidence, right? Giving you a little more confidence with the results. And so it pays off. I mean, for me, it always pays off because I love educating. But even if you're not an educator, it pays off because in the end, you have a team that's connected. As I said at the very beginning, it's a team that's connected to you, right? And there's a whole continuum through that, as opposed to being the big CEO nobody talks to. That's in my opinion, that's a load of bull. All right. So, a lot of CEOs do that because they don't know, and they're embarrassed to actually go to their team and say, I don't know. All they're doing is really what they're doing is they're saying, make it better. They come into a meeting and they say, we need better sales. Where's the analytics on this? Come on, man. Ultimately it's their responsibility, right? So that's what's funny. So, that's what I definitely try and encourage of the executives is to get involved, and don't worry about, I mean, people will think more of you, because you're actually showing engagement and interest of what your team's doing,
Yeah.
So that's
it's so interesting that you mentioned that, because now I'm thinking about it, now that we've actually had like a good conversation on it, I'm kind of seeing the early stages a lot more clearer than I have before. So thanks so much. But just to kind of explain where I'm at here, it's like the 80-20 of being a data scientist who's studying to work in one of these roles is the tech side, is hunkering down, getting these reports out. But as soon as you get that degree and you walk out, the 80-20 actually comes from, because you already have the technology. As I said earlier, you're the purveyors of truth in whatever organization you do, whether you go into TD or another company like that you already have that truth. You already have the skills to get that truth to the forefront. The actual 80-20 then becomes about the soft skills side. And as I said earlier, this is where the most successful people go. And I'm glad to hear that you're teaching the next generation, because there is all this stuff to do when you tell them, but also at the same time, they're in the most exciting profession in the world, and they're going to get a lot better paid and have a lot more fun than the drama degrees out there. So the theater degrees, but maybe we'll cut that bit out.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Pascal, it's been absolutely fantastic speaking to you. Very unique perspective. And I look forward to connecting with you again sometime soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. It's been great.